Hey, it's Tony Brueski. This Thanksgiving weekend, we're taking a look back at some of the most compelling cases and conversations that we've had in the last year. Here's another one of those conversations. Will there ever be justice for Ellen Greenberg? And I guess that depends what you mean by justice as well. In my opinion, it would be finding some closure for the family, finding who actually killed their daughter and why. And if there's a cover up, who was involved in that and why as well. Since most of the criminal prosecution in this has never really taken place because it's never been looked at as a homicide, always a suicide. Unfortunately, some of those roads have not been gone down, at least not yet. Thankfully, because of a civil suit, there's something called discovery, and that's where lots of information can be found. And lots of information is beginning to come out, including the knife, which we now have learned was never fingerprinted. Her diaries, digital footprints, phones, things of that nature, all just sitting in a Philadelphia evidence locker for many years, almost 17 now. Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent, joining us right now to discuss this case. When I'm looking at it, I'm looking for ways that they can find who did this. And there's certainly, without a doubt, a lot of roadblocks that have been put into place. And how and why, I don't know. But I'm wondering if in this discovery, if they can start looking at the physical pieces of evidence, if they can get that out of the evidence locker, can we start going down a path to possibly identifying who may have done this? Or did someone think far enough ahead and maybe scrub those items as well?
Well, Tony, the first place you always start is means, mode, and opportunity, and with looking at that crime scene. And I'll start even at the very genesis of at least how law enforcement was alerted.
Yeah.
And that was through the 911 call.
Mm-hmm.
I think one can merely listen to that 911 call and have at least an inkling of who may have been involved in her murder.
You think?
And that was the same person who discovered her, the same person who had the opportunity, the same person who had a motive, the same person who on a 911 call, when asked what's happened, well, I don't know, she's laying there. Well, can you give her CPR? Well, I might be able to. Oh, yeah, there is a knife sticking through her chest. You have to listen to the details of that tape. It is unbelievable in terms of not being believable.
100%. To me, if you didn't know what you were listening to, you'd almost think you were listening to someone doing an improv call to a fake 911. Because it doesn't sound real. Oh, my gosh. It's just, I don't know. I mean, everybody reacts differently. I'll say that. But my God, I mean, there's a lot in that. And that seems to be the individual that nobody wants to talk about because it has been fairly litigious. But at the same point, everything seems to point in that direction of at least answer some more questions. And that's another part of it. Why was none of that done? Why were there no prints taken on the knife that we've now learned of? There's just so many things that it seemed immediately there was someone who knew something, then we're going to quickly swipe this over here and maybe no one will notice. But of course, in time, everybody gets to start seeing this evidence and what happened. And it doesn't look good for that individual. And I do wonder if they're starting to get a little bit nervous that this case continues to be pushed the way it is. And now they've found an inroad with the civil case and the discovery there.
Well, I'm hoping this civil case continues to get the evidence necessary to, as you said, bring someone to justice. But there are already so many clues. As an example, the whole situation with him, quote unquote, going to the gym and then comes back and breaks in.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to ask people in your audience, have you ever thought your wife, your sister, your mom was inside and wasn't answering for some reason? And so you felt the need to break down the door, although he really didn't have to break down anything, because if you look, there was just almost zero damage done, which to me looks like a very staged situation. And none of what he said makes sense with the physical evidence, meaning what he said on that recording combined with how that lock looks on the door.
Well, in what have you ever seen a case where someone has been stabbed 20 sometimes, half in the back and in the head, where they didn't look at it as a homicide? What on earth would be going through anyone's mind to think suicide here? Or at least at the very beginning, I think suicide would be like the shock later on, where we've determined this actually was a suicide. Weeks later, after going through all of the evidence and going, well, this really does appear to be that way. This is, initially homicide, then moved to suicide. I don't even know why it would have been suicide to begin with in any stretch of the imagination, but to not initially be investigating someone who was stabbed 20 times in their apartment as a homicide with all the evidence that was there, and to not even look at it as a crime scene. That to me is just baffling.
It is baffling. And that initial ME, as you just said, did rule it a homicide. He changed it apparently based on this testimony by her then fiance that she was by herself and he had to break in and nobody else was there. So therefore, she must have killed herself.
Yeah.
That's literally how they put the puzzle pieces together. The only problem is it's a 50-piece puzzle and I see 3 pieces.
Well, and what another piece I wonder about here is, let's assume that there is some sort of cover-up going on or something of that nature, trying to protect whoever was behind this. Wouldn't you almost have to have informed the parties that are going to be involved in this case ahead of time that, look, this is going to happen, and here's where I want it to go? Otherwise, I think it'd be a very frantic, oh my God, how do I get this person in this place to say this or that in order for it to flow just as well as it did to not go into a homicide investigation? It almost reads to me like there was more people involved, at least knowledge-wise, of what was about to go down, so it could kind of go under the radar in such an easy way as it happened.
Well, how I think it happened, at least based on all the materials that fortunately I've been able to view. The Greenbergs have been great and, have sent everything, their whole case file to me. And it's so good to be able to see a lot of that information. But what I see happened was individuals who got into a horrible fight. A knife was grabbed. He, I believe, murdered her and then staged leaving, going to work out, coming back, finding her. This was a night of a lot of snow, a bad night. I think the individuals who showed up were extremely incompetent. And I say that again, based on what I've read and how they handled the crime scene. But this is where it took that turn of people saying it's corrupt, is his uncle showed up.
Yeah.
Now, his uncle is a judge, as you probably know, Tony.
Yes.
And this judge took evidence out of there. And furthermore, and this was the real killer, is the crime scene was scrubbed by a professional crime scene scrubbing company the next morning, Tony.
The next morning. Yeah. How?
The next morning. Never secured.
Yeah. Yeah. None of it adds up. These things are all glaring. I don't know if this happened in any other case. I have never seen anything like this. And it's hard to tell where incompetence is at play here or a cover-up is at play here, or maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, incompetence, I believe, mirrors all these mistakes are made and, the manager calls down to the, police department, because that's how it began, this cleanup, and said, listen, can I clean this place? There's blood everywhere. It's a hot mess. And whoever answered the phone says, sure, go ahead, clean it up. And in fact, gives them the name of a cleanup service.
Yeah.
Crime scene cleanup service. And so, of course, they get it done right away. I don't think the apartment manager was in on it per se. I don't think that clerk or whoever answered was in on it. It was just so incompetent, that it could be handled that way.
Or it's like, if you don't know what you don't know, you wouldn't realize how serious the situation is. And if you're hired to do a job, you're hired to do a job. But when you get to the law enforcement angle of it and the lack of any sort of investigation there, and the connection to the judge and the high powered, it makes you wonder, was this a crime of passion that then thankfully someone was very well connected and was able to try and get this covered up. And then because very high profile people were involved possibly in a cover up, that the cover up ends up being worse than, nothing's worse than murder, but it ends up being more confusing than the crime itself, because then you have all these other people now that could have their lives ruined because they were standing up for someone to try and prevent them from getting in some sort of trouble.
Right. And again, Tony, I don't have all the facts.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of them. I don't have all the facts to know for sure. I'm just saying that there's definitely reasonable suspicion, let's call it, that would point in that direction.
And at the very least, I think all of us say, just examine it. Just see what you find. If it leads nowhere and that person is innocent, then nothing to do with it, great. But at least ask the questions. At least go down the road.
Right. At least fingerprint the knife.
At the very least.
Can we just start with that?